Hey, we got something really fun for y'all today. Today we're going to show you how we made these beautiful melty glass pendants. Check it out. Alright, let's get down to some lamp working. Lamp working is kind of like glass blowing, just on a small scale with less emphasis on the blowing. First off, we're going to need some mandrels. A mandrel is basically a metal stick that we're going to use to wrap the glass bead around. Because, generally speaking, touching molten glass with your bare hands is not a good idea. We're using some metal skewers that we just happen to have. You can also use bike spokes, or you can go buy some off Amazon. What we're doing here is just coating the mandrel with plaster of Paris to help the bead release from the mandrel. Without this, your beautiful creations will be a part of your mandrel until you break them off. We're actually going to try two methods of release. The second one is a bead release that we got on Amazon. We're going to test which of these methods work better and let you know later on. The bead release seemed to go on much more smoothly, so if you go the plaster route, I might preemptively say to put 2 coats on and to mix it more thoroughly than we did in this video. You are definitely going to need some safety glasses and fire resistant gloves when playing with fire and glass. If you're new to lamp working like us, we found that the glass often shattered when you're heating it up, so yeah, just wear the goggles. We're using glass remnants of another awesome jewelry project that we did. Check out the video in the top right corner if you want to see what we did there. We're going to be using Matte Pro gas with a torch that we got from Home Depot. Matte Pro gets to a much hotter temperature than a lot of other gases, and it'll be able to melt our glass sufficiently. Matte Pro is great for beginners. Just make sure you're in a ventilated area when you're using it. You can get a can for about 13 bucks. We did everything you'll see here on this video in just over 1 canister. You're also going to want some pliers that you're okay torching a little bit. We used some needle nose pliers and this other really interesting set that has a curved tip. They're usually for automotive use, but they also worked really well for this. Alright, time to melt some glass. We want these canes to be as thin as possible, so that they're easier to melt later on, although we did find that the really thin ones are pretty hard to make. We were a little bit ambitious with this first one and it got way too thin and promptly broke, so on to the next. This one turned out pretty good. The glass is kind of cool because it looks like it's red glass, but in reality it's actually just coated. So you can see here the coating is slowly melting off and revealing the glass underneath, which is really awesome. I wish it was red, but hey, it works. And this one got really long, which will be super helpful when we go to make the beads. Okay, feel free to skip ahead to the next chapter if you've done this process before. I just wanted to show y'all how long it takes to make one of these canes not sped up and to walk you through some of the little tricks that I use to get these canes to come out well. You'll want to start by flashing both pieces of glass in the heat for just a couple of seconds. If you only heat up one side or just like the tip of the glass is likely to shatter because it won't have the heat evenly distributed. Once you've done that, you'll want to heat up just the tips of the glass where you want the 2 pieces to meet. Beforehand, choose where you want the glass to meet by checking for the pointiest point. That way the tips will melt together faster and be easier to join. Once they're a nice golden orange, gently bring them together and twist them together a little bit. Then from one side, gently pull and keep the other side in the flame. It needs to be just at the right temperature where it doesn't get too melty that the connection breaks, but also not too cold where you just can't pull it. It took some time to get used to, but I found it helpful to look at the color of the glass to gauge its temperature. If you can still see the original color of the glass, it's way too cold. And if you're seeing a bright yellow, kind of like if you're staring into a mini sun, that's way too hot. You want it to be a nice amber that's pliable but not too gooey. And it also really helps to have steady hands, unlike me. Be prepared to have tired arms after this if you're not used to it. Each of these longer canes take about 3 minutes from start to finish, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but that gets pretty old pretty fast. I noticed there were some differences between the way some of the glass colors handled. The light blue liked to explode a lot. I don't know if that was because it was thicker or if it was just a different type of glass. I know sometimes the pigments that are used can directly affect the properties of the glass because the frits or coloring agents they use contain actual ingredients like cobalt, cadmium, sulfur, same as your average paint. The red, or well, clear glass was the best behaved. It didn't break much and it really stretched nice and evenly. The dark green that you'll see in just a minute here was very malleable because it was much thinner than the other two, but also it was much harder to get a straight cane out of it. Okay, I am super happy with this cane. I'm definitely going to be making some cool beads with it. So here's that green cane that I mentioned. You can see that it's just coming out really lumpy. I think that I should have done a better job of twisting the two together when I first connected the two pieces, because no matter what I did, it kept acting as if it was a thin sheet of glass rather than a rod of glass, if that makes any sense. Okay, that's all the cane that we're gonna make today. Not too bad for our first try. Let's move on to making the beads.
So let's make ourselves a bead. First you want to heat up the rod. That's the plaster or bead release dipped rod. You want to make sure that turns orange and then doesn't cool off before you wrap your glass around it. So stick that in the flame and then bring the glass stick rod thing into the flame and let the glass heat up, and then start wrapping it, kind of spinning that rod around and just letting it coil around to create a bead. So here we've got one of those beads that was put onto a plaster coated rod, and the plaster really didn't work very well. It kind of chipped off and resulted in the beads sticking, and you ended up having to break the glass bead to get it off of the rod in a lot of the cases. I think we got one or two that worked out, but you can see here I'm really struggling to wiggle these off and they're still breaking apart in my hands, which isn't great. So don't recommend the plaster dipped rod. I would definitely recommend getting the bead release. It's not that expensive, just go buy it online.
Okay, so this is pretty cool. The depressurization of this canister has caused ice to form at the base. It's about 60 degrees outside right now, so that's a lot of cooling. 3 cheers for thermodynamics.
And here's a close-up shot of us wrapping that glass around that rod, or mandrel is the technical term. A little difficult to say, but so take your glass and just coil it around. You can make something spherical or more cylindrical. We definitely found that smaller beads than we had hoped worked better. This one was a very cool one to create. I made a clear glass sphere and then put tiny little droplets of that dark glass on there. And Brad here is doing a similar thing, just with stripes, which actually turned out really stunning, but unfortunately these larger beads really did not work out well. Glass likes to cool slowly, and we don't have the facilities to properly cool a large piece of glass. What you would need for that is an annealer, which is an oven that cools down very slowly over several hours. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have that device, so anything that was over about a half of an inch in diameter really did not make it. They started to fall apart in my hands as I started to take them off of the rods, and as beautiful as they turned out here, it's not great when your bead breaks. So definitely stay on the smaller side unless you have an annealing facility at your disposal. So for the bead release to properly release, you are supposed to soak it for about 30 minutes in water, and that's what we're doing here. Make sure that the bead is obviously completely cool first, because otherwise you're going to shock it even more. But as you can see here, these are breaking in my hands. Anything that's big is just not coming off without shattering. And it's very unfortunate. Be super careful when you're doing this. Obviously, it's glass, so don't cut yourself. Gloves are probably a wise choice, but I'm not wise all the time, so I'm using a towel here, and that worked all right for me. Just be super careful not to squeeze the bead too hard because that will encourage it to break further. And again, these larger ones that are so stunning, unfortunately did not stay together. So I'm actually curious about how we can alleviate that issue of super fast cooling, and maybe there's a way for us to do a DIY annealer situation that maybe can take an hour to cool over that time. I'm not actually sure. I need to do some research. Let me know if you want to see a video of that in the comments, and I will definitely do the research and post a future video if there's interest. So these are the beads that survived. We need a bit more practice to get this refined a bit and to get more beads to survive, but I'm really happy with the ones that did make it. Let us know what you think in the comments, and if you give this a try, of course, tag us at Breva Creative on your social media.